Dad's words cut deeper than any knife. You're worthless in this industry. 1 week later, I was sitting across from him with a $10 million contract in my hands. The look on his face? Priceless. If you've ever been underestimated or told you weren't good enough, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and drop a like to follow more inspiring journeys of proving the doubters wrong. The clinking of expensive silverware against porcelain plates filled my father's dining room as I pushed my salad around, trying to muster an appetite. The familiar tension in the air was thick enough to cut with the silver knife resting beside my barely touched filet mignon. "So, Camille?" my father, Richard Parker, said with that tone, the one that always preceded criticism. "Your mother tells me you quit Hartwell and Bryson last month. Another job down the drain." I glanced at my mother, who suddenly became very interested in her wine glass. At 48, I still felt like a disappointing teenager in this house. The sprawling mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut hadn't changed much since my childhood. The same intimidating family portraits, the same suffocating expectations. "I didn't quit, Dad. I left to start my own consulting firm." He scoffed, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "Consulting? That's what people call unemployment these days." My sister Diane stifled a laugh beside him. She'd always been the golden child, Harvard Business School, VP at one of Boston's top investment firms by 30, married to a surgeon with 2 perfect children. I, on the other hand, was the family disappointment despite my MBA from Columbia and decade of experience in financial technology. It's not unemployment. I already have 2 clients, and I'm pitching to Westlake Technologies next week. I tried to keep my voice steady, professional, the way I would in a boardroom. "Westlake?" My father paused mid-bite. "Don't waste Harold Westlake's time. He only works with serious players." "I am a serious player, Dad." He set down his fork and knife, looking at me directly for the first time that evening. "Camille, let's be realistic. You've jumped from job to job for years. You lack focus, commitment. What makes you think you can run a business when you can't even hold down a position for more than 2 years?" "Because I'm good at what I do. Because I understand fintech in ways that Westlake needs established firms, not amateurs playing entrepreneur." He took a sip of his whiskey. "This is what I mean. Always these impulsive decisions. You should be focused on climbing the ladder at a respectable firm, not throwing everything away on a whim." My mother finally spoke up. "Richard, Camille has always been independent. Maybe this is... Independence doesn't pay the bills, Margaret." He turned back to me. "At your age, I was already running the entire East Coast division." I felt that familiar burning sensation behind my eyes, but refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crack. Times are different now. Excuses are different. Results are still results. He gestured vaguely with his hand. "And yours have been consistently disappointing." I set my napkin on the table. "I should go. I have work to prepare for tomorrow." "Work?" He laughed, a short, dismissive sound that echoed in my chest. "Listen to me, Camille. You're 48 years old. It's time to stop this nonsense and accept reality. You're simply not cut out for success in this business. You never have been." The dining room fell silent. Even Diane looked uncomfortable. "Richard," my mother whispered. "No, Margaret, she needs to hear this." I've spent years watching her flounder. The sooner she accepts her limitations, the better off she'll be. He turned back to me, his face a mask of condescension that I'd known all my life. "You're worthless in this industry, Camille. A complete waste of potential. The sooner you realize that, the sooner you can find something more appropriate for your abilities." Worthless. The word hung in the air like a verdict. I stood up, somehow keeping my composure. "Thank you for dinner." I drove home to my apartment in the city, the skyline of Manhattan glittering across the bridge as tears finally fell. But somewhere between Greenwich and my front door, something hardened inside me. Worthless? I'd show him exactly what I was worth. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I dressed meticulously in my best charcoal gray suit, applied my makeup with precision, and headed to the small office space I'd leased in Midtown. My phone rang as I was reviewing my presentation for Westlake Technologies. It was my former colleague from Hartwell and Bryson, Lucas. Camille, got a minute? Heard through the grapevine that you're pitching to Westlake next week. Word travels fast, I said, sorting through my notes. Listen, I thought you should know. Your father called Harold Westlake yesterday. I froze. What? Yeah, apparently he suggested Westlake should work with Diane's firm instead. Said they needed someone reliable. The betrayal stung, but it didn't surprise me. Thanks for letting me know, Lucas. For what it's worth, I think Harold wasn't impressed by the interference. He's known for making his own decisions. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, staring at the Manhattan skyline through my window. My father had always undermined me, but actively sabotaging my business was a new low. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I rarely used. Hello, this is Harold Westlake's office. This is Camille Parker. I'd like to reschedule my meeting with Mr. Westlake. Is tomorrow possible? Harold Westlake's office was exactly what you'd expect from a tech mogul worth billions. Minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. At 65, Harold had the energy of someone decades younger, his eyes sharp behind designer glasses. Ms. Parker, I must say I was intrigued when you asked to move our meeting up. He gestured for me to sit across from his glass desk, especially after receiving a rather peculiar call from Richard Parker yesterday. I met his gaze steadily. Mr. Westlake, I believe in transparency. My father and I have different opinions about my capabilities. A hint of a smile crossed his face. I've known Richard for 20 years. He has many strengths, but recognizing talent outside his prescribed parameters isn't one of them. I placed my portfolio on his desk. Then I hope you'll judge my proposal on its own merits. For the next hour, I walked him through my strategy for revolutionizing Westlake's fintech infrastructure. I'd spent weeks analyzing their systems, identifying inefficiencies, and developing solutions that could save them millions while expanding their market reach. When I finished, Harold leaned back in his chair. Impressive. But why should I trust a new firm with this level of transformation? Your father mentioned you have a history of impermanence. My impermanence, as he calls it, is precisely why you should trust me. I've worked at 5 different financial institutions over the past decade because I refuse to accept mediocrity. Each move was a step toward building the expertise I needed to do exactly this kind of work. I pulled out a document and slid it across his desk. This is a performance guarantee. If my solutions don't deliver at least a 15% improvement in efficiency and a 12% reduction in operational costs within 6 months, you pay nothing. Harold picked up the document, eyebrows raised. That's quite a guarantee. I don't make promises I can't keep, Mr. Westlake. Call me Harold. He studied me for a moment. You know, your father said you were a dreamer, not grounded enough for this business. With respect to my father, he confuses ambition with dreaming. I'm not proposing fantasy. I'm offering solutions based on data, experience, and innovation. Harold nodded slowly, then stood up and extended his hand. I look forward to seeing your contract proposal, Ms. Parker. As I drove home that evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. Camille, your father heard you met with Harold Westlake today. He's displeased. I sighed. I'm sure he is. He says you're making a fool of yourself. That Harold was just being polite. Mom, I appreciate the concern, but this is my business. My life. I know, dear, Her voice dropped to a whisper. I just wish things were different between you two. That makes 2 of us. 3 days later, Harold Westlake's office called. They wanted to proceed with my proposal, starting with a trial project worth $2 million. It wasn't the full contract, but it was a foot in the door that my father had tried to slam shut. I celebrated that night with my best friend Rachel at our favorite wine bar in Soho. To telling Richard Parker to shove it, Rachel said, raising her glass. I laughed. I haven't actually told him anything yet. But you will. God, I've been waiting 20 years to see you finally stand up to that man. Rachel had been by my side since college, through every career move, every criticism from my father, every moment of self-doubt he'd planted. She was the sister I wished Diane had been. "It's just a trial project," I said, trying to temper my own excitement. "It's Westlake Technologies, Camille, one of the biggest tech firms in the country, and you did it on your own, despite your father actively working against you." I smiled, allowing myself to feel proud. I did, didn't I? So what's next? I swirled the wine in my glass. I proved to Harold that his trust is well placed. And then I go after the full contract. And your father? One bridge at a time. The next week passed in a blur of activity. I assembled a small team of contractors I'd worked with in the past, people whose talents had been overlooked at larger firms, just as mine had been. Together, we began the initial assessment of Westlake's systems. It was during this process that we discovered something significant, a vulnerability in their payment processing infrastructure that was costing them millions in microtransaction fees. It was cleverly hidden in their legacy systems, something that had been overlooked during previous updates. I called an emergency meeting with Harold. "So you're saying we've been hemorrhaging money for years without realizing it?" Harold asked after I'd explained our findings. "Yes, approximately $14 million annually, based on our calculations." "And you found this in a week?" "Sometimes fresh eyes see what familiar ones miss." Harold stood up and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "The full infrastructure overhaul you proposed initially. How quickly could you implement it? With the right resources? 3 months?" He turned back to me. "Do it in 2, and I'll triple the contract value." I didn't hesitate. Done. For the next 6 weeks, I barely saw the inside of my apartment. My team and I worked around the clock, restructuring Westlake's entire fintech ecosystem. We replaced outdated protocols, streamlined payment processing, and implemented cutting-edge security measures that put them years ahead of their competitors. Harold was impressed with our progress, but I knew the real test would come when we launched the new system. One mistake, one overlooked detail, and my reputation, everything I'd worked for, would be destroyed. The night before the launch, I received a text from my sister. "Dad knows about the Westlake contract. He's furious. Be prepared." I ignored it and focused on final checks with my team. By morning, we were ready. The system migration began at 4 a.m., the lowest traffic period for Westlake's global platforms. By 9 a.m., the transition was complete, and it worked flawlessly. Harold called me into his office that afternoon, his face unreadable. "Our transaction processing speed has increased by 64%, he said without preamble. "Security protocols are functioning at optimal levels, and the payment vulnerability has been eliminated." I waited, heart pounding. "In short, Ms. Parker, you've exceeded every expectation." A smile finally broke through his serious demeanor. "The board has authorized the full contract, effective immediately. $10 million with a 2-year extension option." I tried to maintain my professional composure, but couldn't help the grin that spread across my face. "Thank you for trusting me, Harold. I trust results, Camille, and yours speak volumes." He handed me a signed contract. "There's one more thing. Richard Parker called this morning." My smile faded. "Oh?" "He suggested I reconsider our arrangement. Said you were likely to abandon the project once you had the money." Harold's expression hardened. "I don't appreciate being told how to run my business, especially by someone who clearly doesn't recognize talent when it's in his own family." I didn't know what to say. I told him our contract was non-negotiable, and that perhaps he should focus on his own company's outdated infrastructure rather than concerning himself with mine. Harold adjusted his glasses. I hope that wasn't overstepping. For the first time in days, I laughed. Really laughed. Not at all. That evening, my mother called. "Your father wants you to come to dinner tomorrow night." "I'm busy, Mom." "Please, Camille. He knows about the Westlake contract. I think he wants to... Well, I'm not sure what he wants, but he insisted." I sighed. "Fine, but I'm not staying long." The next day, my team and I celebrated with champagne in our small office. Rachel brought cupcakes and we toasted to our success. But as evening approached, dread settled in my stomach at the thought of facing my father. I arrived at my parents' house precisely on time, parking my car beside my father's Mercedes in the circular driveway. My mother greeted me at the door with a nervous smile. "He's in his study," she whispered. "He wants to speak with you alone before dinner." My father's study had always been forbidden territory when I was growing up, a masculine sanctuary of leather, mahogany, and intimidation. I knocked once and entered without waiting for a response, a small act of defiance. He was standing by the window, tumbler of whiskey in hand, looking out at the manicured garden. At 68, he was still imposing, his silver hair perfectly styled, his posture rigid with authority. "Sit down, Camille." I remained standing. "I prefer to stand." He turned, eyes narrowing slightly at my defiance. "Harold Westlake called me yesterday." I heard. $10 million is a significant contract for a new firm. He took a sip of his whiskey, especially one without a proven track record. My track record is what secured that contract. Westlake is taking a considerable risk. Actually, the risk was eliminated when we completed the trial project ahead of schedule and under budget, while identifying a vulnerability that was costing them millions annually. My father's jaw tightened. "You got lucky." "No, I got good. There's a difference." He set his glass down on his desk with more force than necessary. "This attitude is precisely why I've always had concerns about your business acumen. Success requires humility, Camille." I couldn't help but laugh. "Humility? From you? That's rich." "Watch your tone." "Or what? You'll call me worthless again? Tell more of my potential clients not to work with me?" I stepped closer to his desk. "I'm not that little girl desperate for your approval anymore, Dad. I'm a successful business owner who just secured a major contract despite your active sabotage. I was trying to protect you from failure." "No, you were trying to protect yourself from the embarrassment of having a daughter who didn't follow your prescribed path. Heaven forbid I succeed on my own terms instead of yours." He was silent for a moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You've changed." "No, I've finally become who I always was, when I'm not in this house under your thumb." My mother knocked softly before opening the door. "Dinner's ready." The meal was tense, with conversation limited to safe topics like the weather and my niece's piano recital. As dessert was served, my father cleared his throat. "Your mother and I are hosting our annual charity gala next month. The guest list includes several potential clients who might benefit from your services." It was as close to an apology as I'd ever get from Richard Parker. "I'll check my calendar," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. For the first time in my life, I saw something new in my father's eyes. Not approval, exactly, but perhaps a grudging respect. And somehow, that felt better than the approval I'd spent decades chasing. The Westlake contract changed everything. Within months, word spread through the industry about the firm that had revolutionized Westlake's fintech infrastructure. Inquiries began pouring in, from startups to established corporations looking for the same transformative results. I expanded my team, moved to larger offices, and found myself in the position of turning down work rather than desperately seeking it. My firm, Parker Innovation Solutions, was becoming a recognized name in financial technology consulting. 6 months after the Westlake launch, Harold invited me to speak at a major industry conference in San Francisco. My father's firm would be represented there as well, by him personally. "Are you nervous about seeing him?" Rachel asked as we packed for the trip. "Strangely, no. It feels like we're finally on equal footing." The conference venue was packed with industry leaders, innovators, and investors. My presentation was scheduled for the main hall on the second day, while my father would be speaking in a smaller breakout session that same afternoon. As I reviewed my notes in the speaker's lounge, a familiar voice caught me off guard. "Your slideshow materials seem well prepared." I looked up to see my father standing there, immaculate in his tailored suit, a conference badge hanging around his neck. "Thank you," I said, surprised by the genuine compliment. He sat down across from me, hands folded neatly on the table between us. "I reviewed your work for Westlake. The transaction processing system you implemented is impressive." Coming from him, it was the highest praise imaginable. "Harold seems quite taken with your approach," he continued. He's been rather vocal about it in certain circles. I smiled. Harold appreciates innovation. Indeed. My father hesitated, something I'd rarely seen him do. Your mother mentioned you might be looking for office space in Connecticut. We're expanding. The commute from the city is becoming impractical for some of my team. He nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket and removed a business card, sliding it across the table. This property developer owes me a favor. Tell him I sent you. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even particularly warm. But for Richard Parker, it was a peace offering. Thank you, I said, pocketing the card. I'll consider it. When it was time for my presentation, I walked onto the stage and spotted my father in the audience. Not at his own session, but sitting in the third row, watching me. Our eyes met briefly before I turned to address the crowd. For the next hour, I outlined our approach to modernizing financial technology infrastructures, using the Westlake project as a case study. The audience was engaged, questions were thoughtful, and when I finished, the applause was substantial. As people filed out, Harold Westlake approached me at the podium. Brilliant presentation, Camille. I've had 6 people ask for your contact information already. Thank you for the opportunity to share our work. It's selfish on my part. The more successful you become, the more your innovations benefit my company. He glanced over my shoulder. Ah, Richard, I thought you had your own session this afternoon. My father had approached without my noticing. I rescheduled. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Harold chuckled. And I can see why Westlake has been so satisfied with the results. My father's tone was professional, but I detected something else beneath it. Perhaps pride, though he'd never admit it. Your daughter has a remarkable talent for identifying systemic inefficiencies, Harold said. Something few consultants manage to do effectively. She's always had a knack for seeing what others miss, my father replied, surprising me. Even as a child. Later that evening, at the conference reception, I found myself standing next to my father at the bar. Your presentation was well received, he said, signaling for another scotch. Thank you for coming. I know you had your own session scheduled. Some things take priority. He accepted his drink from the bartender. Your mother tells me you've been too busy to visit lately. The business is demanding. Yes, success often is. He took a sip of his scotch. The charity gala is next weekend. Several Westlake board members will be attending. I haven't forgotten. I'll be there. He nodded, then said something I never thought I'd hear from Richard Parker. I was wrong about you, Camille. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Not about everything, he qualified quickly. Your approach is still too unconventional for my taste. But about your potential, I was wrong. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. But in that moment, standing in a room full of industry leaders who now viewed me as a peer rather than an also-ran, it was enough. Thank you, Dad. As we stood there, Harold Westlake approached with another man, the CEO of one of the largest financial institutions on the West Coast. Richard, Camille, I'd like you to meet David Hendricks from Pacific Financial. David, this is the father-daughter powerhouse I was telling you about. My father and I exchanged a glance, both of us momentarily surprised by Harold's characterization. Pleasure to meet you both, David said. Harold tells me you've revolutionized his fintech infrastructure, Ms. Parker. Camille has a unique approach, my father said before I could answer. Perhaps unprecedented in the industry. I couldn't help but smile. One dinner, one word, worthless, had set me on a path that led here, to this moment of vindication. But the victory wasn't in proving my father wrong. It was in proving myself right. As the evening continued, I mingled with potential clients, investors, and competitors, no longer in my father's shadow, but standing in my own light. The path forward was clear, bright with possibility, and untainted by doubt. I was Camille Parker, founder and CEO of Parker Innovation Solutions, and I was anything but worthless.